So we're going to talk about what really causes the self-reinforcing and self-justifying bias that actually maintains the structure of the current ideological battles. Right? So we're going to contend that ideological fights are happening and have always happened through sort of superficial and symbolic differences that are subjectively cherry-picked so that they actually form into irrational structures that, separate from the context, don't actually make any sense, but they make sense for the time. So we're going to first start with, sort of the core and the source of all that, which is the person who is actually perceiving the ideology, right? So for rationality to exist, meaning a subjective, collective or individual, to be able to function, so for example, a person or a collective society, to be able to function rationally, certain irrationalities have to be fulfilled, right? They have certain irrational needs that have to be met before the rational process can actually exist, right? And it's in the same way that, you have a child that needs attention. What has it done to actually deserve that attention? Nothing, right? But you still need to give it attention. And the same goes here. People tend to think of rationality or the rational solution as some sort of truth, but there is no obligation for the subject to respect rationality. In fact, all of this, the core of the duality of man is that the subject is inherently irrational, and rationality is actually a byproduct of that. So, the subjective perception needs to be able to explain its own subjective bias and the things that it irrationally covets and wants, and it views as sacred. Right? So the inherent core of the duality of man is that man wants it both ways, right? But in order to get that, the subject has to find a way to reconcile the irrational with the rational. It has to find a way to explain its subjective bias. So that's where the lawyer in you comes in. And so the lawyer in you, in the subjective individual, or even in the collective, right? So the entire society is going to have a group of people who are specialists in justifying their own subjective biases and actually representing their bias for the entire group. So if you think about it within a collective society, there is always going to be a group of people with a certain intent, for example, a right-wing or a left-wing intent, and there are going to be certain egos or personalities that are experts in justifying or lawyering for that position, for that bias, which again is completely subjective. But they're going to try to find a way to justify or glorify that subjective intent and connect it to objective reality or objective truth. So their job is basically to objectify the subjective and glorify their subjective belief. Each of these subjective camps are going to glorify their subjective beliefs by citing certain partial elements from objective reality. So, if you assume, right, in the same way you assume in math and in physics, that ideology and politics is the subjective domain. We're not saying that it is, but say we assume that it is for the purpose of this explanation. Then, ideology and politics is where the individual and collective subjective comes to objectify its subjectivity, to legitimize its irrationality. And this is sort of the collective's or the subjective's way of meeting objectivity halfway, right? So it can convince itself that it possesses truth in some way, that its position is the one true position, right? In the same way that a believer in religion, in a particular religion, has to believe that his or her God is the one true God. So the subject always has this uncontainable desire to possess the neutral and the indifferent. And it wants to possess something that is completely beyond its control, that it covets the direct antithesis to its subjectivity, which is objectivity that is totally indifferent to its own bias.